The evening sky over the military base was turning a soft shade of orange, as if even the sun was tired of watching people come and go in uniforms, orders, and silent discipline. Inside a modest off-base apartment, Aisha stood near the window holding a teacup that had gone cold long ago. She wasn't looking outside anymore. She was simply staring, lost in thoughts she couldn't organize into words. Today was supposed to feel special. It was their first-month anniversary. Not officially celebrated in a grand way, but emotionally, it mattered to her. Aisha had always believed that small moments define big relationships. A shared meal, a smile after a long day, a hand reaching out when silence becomes heavy. She didn't need luxury. She needed presence. And Daniel, her husband, was everything opposite of chaos. A U.S. Army officer. Disciplined. Controlled. Emotionally reserved. A man trained to survive pressure, not express feelings easily. When they first got married, Aisha thought that discipline would bring stability. She believed emotional distance was just a surface layer that would melt with time. But she didn't know then that some people don't melt easily. They adapt. And sometimes adaptation looks like silence. Their marriage had begun quickly, almost unexpectedly. A cultural exchange program had connected their families. At first, it was just formal introductions, respectful conversations, and carefully arranged meetings. Daniel was stationed temporarily overseas for training coordination. Aisha was working part-time as a language instructor assistant, helping international cadets improve communication skills. They met during one of those sessions. Aisha still remembered that first interaction clearly. Daniel had walked into the classroom in uniform, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply existed like someone used to command environments without speaking too much. Aisha had greeted him politely. "Good morning, Captain Daniel." He had nodded. "Morning." Just one word. No smile, no unnecessary warmth. But something about his calmness stayed in her mind, longer than expected. He didn't try to dominate the room. He didn't try to charm anyone. He just observed. And Aisha, without realizing it, found that more intriguing than loud confidence. Their relationship didn't develop like a typical romance. There were no dramatic confessions or cinematic chase scenes. It was slow, almost too slow. Daniel started showing up a little earlier to class sessions. Aisha started noticing small things, like how he always chose the same seat, how he listened more than he spoke, how he remembered details without reacting emotionally. One day, after class, he had stayed back. "You explain things clearly," he said. Aisha looked up from her notes. "I try to." He nodded slightly. Most instructors talk too much. That was it. No compliment. No smile. Just a fact. But strangely, it made her smile. Because it felt honest. Weeks passed. Then months. Their conversations grew slightly longer. Still minimal. Still controlled. But present. And then came the unexpected moment neither of them planned for. A rainy evening. A delayed training schedule. Aisha had been leaving campus when the storm started heavily. She stood under a shelter, watching the rain fall in sheets, realizing she would have to wait. And then a car stopped near her. The window rolled down. It was Daniel. "Get in," he said simply. She hesitated. "I can wait." He looked at her for a moment. "You'll get sick." That was all. No persuasion. No emotional pressure. Just concern, stated like an order. She got in. And that ride changed everything. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because for the first time, Silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt shared. Marriage came later, faster than she expected. Her family saw stability in him. His family saw respect in her. And both sides agreed it was a good match. But nobody asked the question that mattered most. Were they emotionally ready for each other? Now, after marriage, reality had started unfolding quietly. The first few days were almost peaceful. Daniel maintained his routine. Aisha tried to adapt. She would wake up early, prepare meals, organize the small apartment, and wait for him to return from base. Daniel would come home tired, remove his boots carefully, place his keys in the same spot every day, and sit quietly for a few minutes before speaking. Sometimes he would say, "Long day." Sometimes, "Training went late." Sometimes nothing at all. But Aisha didn't mind silence at first. She thought silence meant peace. She didn't yet know silence could also mean distance. One evening, she decided to cook something special. It wasn't an elaborate dish. Just comfort food from her childhood, something warm, something familiar, something that carried emotion more than taste. She spent hours preparing it carefully. Every step felt meaningful. Every detail mattered. She set the table neatly, lit a small candle, even adjusted the lighting to make the room feel softer. Then she waited. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Her phone remained untouched. The food slowly cooled. Her excitement slowly weakened. But she kept telling herself, "He will come." When Daniel finally arrived, his expression was exhausted. Uniform slightly wrinkled, eyes focused elsewhere. He entered, loosening his collar. Aisha stood up immediately, hope returning instantly. "You're late," she said softly. He nodded, training extended. She smiled slightly. "I made dinner." He looked at the table for the first time, then said something that didn't sound rude, but landed heavily. "I already ate at base." Silence. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just sudden emptiness. Aisha blinked slowly. "Oh," she said. Daniel removed his boots. "I didn't know you were cooking." She nodded. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. And both of them knew it. She sat alone at the table later. The food was still warm enough to remind her of effort, but cold enough to remind her of disappointment. Daniel sat on the couch checking messages, unaware of the quiet shift happening across the room. Not anger, not argument, just emotional withdrawal beginning quietly. Days passed. Patterns formed. Daniel's routine stayed strict. Aisha's expectations slowly started shrinking. She stopped asking, "When will you come home?" She stopped saying, "Let's eat together." She stopped waiting at the door. But what she didn't stop was feeling. And feelings that are not expressed don't disappear. They transform into silence, into distance, into emotional weight that sits between two people without being seen. One evening, Daniel noticed her sitting longer than usual near the window. "Aisha," he said, "are you okay?" She smiled automatically. "Yes." Too fast. Too practiced. Daniel paused slightly. "You don't look okay." "I'm fine," she replied. And that was the first moment Daniel felt something unfamiliar. Not conflict, not anger, but uncertainty. Because he realized he might not actually know what fine meant for her anymore. That night when he went to bed, he looked at her turning away slightly. "Aisha," he whispered, "talk to me." She didn't turn back. "I am talking," she said softly. But she was. And both of them knew it. Because sometimes people don't stop talking. They just stopped being understood. And in that quiet room, under the same roof, lying inches apart but emotionally miles away, their marriage had already begun changing shape. Not breaking, not ending, just slowly becoming something neither of them recognized anymore. And neither Daniel nor Aisha realized. This was only the beginning. The night after that silent conversation did not feel like night at all. It felt like a long pause that refused to end. Daniel lay on his side of the bed, staring at the dim ceiling light that Aisha had forgotten to switch off. The soft yellow glow made the room look warmer than it actually was. But warmth, he realized, didn't exist in the space between them anymore. Aisha lay turned away from him. Not asleep. Not speaking. Just present in body, absent in connection. Daniel wasn't used to this kind of silence. In his world, silence usually meant control, discipline, readiness. Silence meant order before action. But this silence felt different. It felt like something slipping out of reach without noise. He turned slightly. "Aisha," he whispered. No response. He waited a few seconds. "Aisha." This time her fingers moved slightly under the blanket, but she didn't turn. "I'm awake," she said softly. That was all. No question. No emotion. Just confirmation of existence. Daniel exhaled slowly. "We need to talk." A pause. Then her voice came again. "About what?" That question should have been simple, but Daniel realized he didn't have a simple answer. "About dinner. About silence. About distance. About feelings he didn't fully understand." He chose the safest option. "About us," he said. Another pause. Longer this time. Aisha finally turned slightly, just enough for him to see part of her face. "In your language," she said quietly, "what does us mean right now?" That question hit him harder than expected. Because he didn't have a definition ready. The next morning arrived too quickly. Daniel woke up before sunrise as usual. His body was trained to respond to routine even when his mind was unsettled. He sat up, rubbing his face, trying to reset himself like he did after long missions. But this wasn't a mission. It was his marriage. And there were no clear instructions for this kind of confusion. Aisha was already in the kitchen. Quiet, focused, making tea. The sound of cups touching the counter echoed softly through the apartment. Daniel stood at the doorway for a moment, watching her. She looked normal, but not the same. There was a difference between functioning and being present. Aisha was functioning. Daniel walked in slowly. "Morning," he said. She didn't look up immediately. "Morning." He waited. Something felt missing. Then he realized it was her usual glance, her usual softness, the small emotional acknowledgement that used to accompany even simple greetings. It wasn't there anymore. He sat at the table. Aisha placed a cup in front of him. Carefully, without looking at him. "You didn't sleep well," she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel frowned slightly. "How do you know?" She finally looked at him. Not emotionally. Observationally. "You're adjusting your shoulders more than usual," she said. "You do that when you're tired but trying to hide it." Daniel paused. She had noticed that. But instead of feeling comforted, he felt exposed. "Observant," he said. Aisha nodded slightly. "I notice things." Then, after a pause, "I always have." That sentence carried weight he couldn't fully understand yet. The day passed in its usual fragmented way. Daniel went to base. Aisha stayed home. But the emotional distance didn't pause with physical distance. It followed them both silently. At base, Daniel found himself distracted during briefing. His commanding officer was speaking, but Daniel's mind kept drifting. To silence, to unanswered questions, to Aisha's voice last night. What does us mean right now? He tightened his grip on his pen. That question refused to leave his thoughts. Meanwhile, at home, Aisha stood near the window again. But this time she wasn't waiting. She was thinking. Not about arguments, not about mistakes, but about expectations. She had entered this marriage believing understanding would come naturally with time, that love would translate itself through actions. But reality was more complicated. Daniel didn't ignore her. He didn't disrespect her. He simply didn't see emotional gaps the way she did. And that difference was becoming dangerous. Because misunderstandings don't always start with fights. Sometimes they start with assumptions. That evening, Daniel returned earlier than expected. Aisha was reading something on her phone. He stood at the door for a second, then said, "I need to ask you something." She didn't look up immediately. "Okay." He stepped inside slowly. "Do you feel unhappy here?" The question dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Aisha finally looked up. Not surprised. Not emotional. Just quiet. "That depends," she said. Daniel frowned. "On what?" She closed her phone. "On whether you think unhappiness is loud," she replied. Silence. Daniel tried again. "That's not what I meant." Aisha stood up now, walking toward the kitchen counter. "You want a simple answer," she said. "I don't have one." Daniel's frustration started rising slightly. "I just want to understand you." Aisha stopped and turned slowly. "Then try understanding what I don't say," she replied. That sentence lingered, because Daniel realized something uncomfortable. He had been waiting for explanations, while she had been giving signals. Later that night, they ate dinner together. But together was only physical. The conversation didn't flow. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. Daniel tried again. "I don't like how things are between us," he said. Aisha nodded slightly. "Neither do I." "Then why is it happening?" She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Because you think nothing is wrong when nothing is said." That hit deeper than she expected. Daniel leaned back slightly. "So you're saying I ignore you?" "I'm saying you don't register silence as pain," she replied. That night after dinner, Daniel sat on the couch longer than usual. Aisha cleaned the kitchen quietly. The sound of water running, dishes touching, and cupboards closing filled the space between them. But emotionally, they were both somewhere else. Daniel kept replaying her words. "You don't register silence as pain." He started realizing something uncomfortable. In his world, problems were clear, visible, defined, fixable. But Aisha's world was different. Her pain didn't always speak. It accumulated, quietly, slowly, until it became distance. When Aisha entered the room later, Daniel finally spoke again. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. Aisha stopped walking. That was the first honest sentence she had heard from him in days. She looked at him. Not angry, not emotional, just tired. "Neither do I," she said. And that honesty was heavier than blame. They stood in the same room again. But something had shifted permanently. Not broken, not resolved, just exposed. Because both of them now realized something neither wanted to accept. They were not arguing about one moment. They were slowly misreading each other's entire emotional language. And neither of them had learned how to translate it yet. The apartment had stopped feeling like a shared space. It now felt like a carefully managed silence that both of them were afraid to disturb. Not because it was peaceful, but because they didn't know what would happen if it broke. Aisha woke up before Daniel again. But this time, she didn't immediately go to the kitchen. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, staring at the floor, as if trying to find answers in something that had no language. Daniel was still asleep. His face looked calmer when he was asleep, less guarded, less rigid, almost like the version of him that didn't belong to the army or discipline. Just a man. Aisha looked at him for a few seconds, then quietly stood up. No emotion on her face, but inside something was changing shape. Not loudly, not dramatically, just permanently. By the time Daniel woke up, she was already gone from the room. He sat up slowly, immediately noticing the absence of routine warmth. No morning sound from the kitchen that usually signaled tea being prepared. No soft movement. No presence. Just silence. He got up and walked into the living room. Aisha was sitting near the window again. Same position, but different energy. "Good morning," Daniel said carefully. She didn't turn immediately. "Morning," she replied after a delay. That delay was new. Daniel noticed it instantly. He walked closer. "You're up early." "I didn't sleep much," she said. Daniel paused. "Why?" Aisha finally turned to him. And for the first time in days, there was something visible in her eyes. Not anger, not sadness. Something closer to exhaustion from emotional restraint. "Do you really want the answer?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. "Yes," he said. Aisha nodded slightly. "Because I'm tired of pretending everything is okay when it is." That sentence changed the air in the room. Daniel felt it immediately. Like pressure shifting. He sat across from her slowly. "Then don't pretend," he said. "Talk to me." Aisha smiled faintly. But it wasn't a happy smile. It was almost ironic. "I've been talking," she said. "You just didn't recognize it." Daniel frowned. "That's not fair." She leaned back slightly. "Fair," she repeated. "Daniel, I waited for you to notice I was slipping away without me having to announce it like a report." That word report landed hard, because it reflected exactly how structured his world was, and how unstructured hers had become. That morning, something small triggered something bigger. Daniel's phone rang while he was in the kitchen. Aisha wasn't trying to listen, but she heard his tone shift slightly. "Yeah, I'll review it later." Pause. "No, I was home yesterday." Another pause. "Okay." He ended the call. Aisha watched him carefully. "What happened?" she asked. Daniel shook his head slightly. "Work issue." But Aisha didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him, then said something quiet. "You always say work issue like it explains everything." Daniel sighed, because most of the time it does. Aisha stood up slowly. "Not for me," she said. The day stretched long. Daniel went to base earlier than usual. Aisha stayed behind. But this time, she didn't clean immediately. She didn't cook. She didn't try to fill the silence with activity. Instead, she sat in the living room for a long time, thinking. Not about arguments anymore, but about patterns. Because she had started noticing something painful. Daniel wasn't emotionally absent. He was emotionally untrained for her type of expression. And she had been waiting for signals he didn't know how to send. Two people speaking different emotional languages. Living in the same home. Slowly misunderstanding everything. At base, Daniel found himself distracted again. During training review, his superior spoke. Your performance is solid, but your focus is slightly off. Daniel nodded, understood. But he wasn't fully listening, because his mind kept returning to something Aisha said earlier. I waited for you to notice I was slipping away. He had always believed attention was for urgent things. Problems, orders, failures. But Aisha was showing him something else. That emotional distance doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly. That evening, Daniel returned home later than expected. And this time, something felt different the moment he entered. The lights were dim. The apartment wasn't messy. But it wasn't warm either. It felt paused. Aisha, he called. No answer immediately. He walked inside. Found her sitting on the couch. Phone in hand. But not looking at it. Just holding it. You didn't eat, he asked. She shook her head slightly. I wasn't hungry. That was new too. Aisha always ate something, even if small. Daniel noticed. He sat down carefully. We need to fix this, he said. Aisha looked at him. Fix what exactly? She asked. Daniel exhaled. This distance between us. Aisha nodded slowly, then said something that shocked him more than anything before. I think it's already fixed, she said. Daniel frowned immediately. What do you mean? She looked away slightly. I stopped expecting things from you, she said quietly. That's what fixed it. Silence. Heavy. Sharp. Daniel felt something tight inside his chest. That's not fixing, he said. That's giving up. Aisha finally looked at him again. No, she said softly, that's survival. The word survival changed everything. Because Daniel realized she wasn't speaking from anger. She was speaking from emotional exhaustion. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just final in tone. He stood up slightly. I never meant to make you feel like this, he said. Aisha nodded. I know. That was worse. Because she didn't blame him. She simply accepted it. Later that night, tension finally broke into words they couldn't take back. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. Aisha stood near the dresser. He spoke first. Tell me what you need from me, he said. Aisha paused. Long silence. Then she replied. I needed you to see me before I disappeared. Daniel rubbed his forehead slightly. I see you now. Aisha shook her head slowly. No, she said, now you're reacting to me, not seeing me. That distinction hit hard. Because it was true. Daniel's voice rose slightly. So what am I supposed to do? Guess everything. Aisha's voice stayed calm. No, she said, just pay attention. Daniel laughed once, frustrated. I am paying attention. Aisha stepped closer now. And for the first time, her voice cracked slightly. No, she said again. You are paying attention when things become loud enough to demand it. Silence fell again. But this time, it wasn't just emotional. It was fragile. Like something on the edge of breaking completely. That night they didn't sleep early. Neither of them. Daniel sat on the couch. Aisha stayed in the bedroom. Separate spaces. Same home. But emotionally miles apart. Daniel realized something uncomfortable. This wasn't a fight that needed winning. It was a connection already weakening beyond simple repair. And Aisha realized something too. She had stopped crying. Not because she healed, but because she had no energy left to break anymore. Outside, the night was quiet. Inside, something between them had fractured in a way that neither words nor silence could easily fix. Not fully broken, not still whole, just slowly becoming something they no longer knew how to name. The morning arrived without softness. No golden light that usually slips through curtains like a gentle reminder of a new start. This morning felt heavier. Still, almost waiting for something unresolved to finally speak. Aisha woke up first, like always now. But this time, she didn't sit by the window. She didn't go to the kitchen. She stayed still for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, as if mentally preparing herself for something she already knew was coming. Daniel was still asleep beside her. But even in sleep, there was distance. Not physical, emotional. She slowly got up and walked out of the room without looking back. In the kitchen, she stood for a long time before doing anything. The kettle was there. The cups were there. The routine was there. But she didn't move immediately. Because something inside her had reached a point where routine no longer felt comforting. It felt mechanical, like repeating a life that no longer felt shared. Finally, she turned the stove on. But her eyes weren't on the tea. They were somewhere far away. Daniel woke up a few minutes later. The first thing he noticed was silence. Not the normal kind. Not peaceful morning silence. But empty silence. He sat up quickly and looked around. "Aisha," he called. No answer. He got up and walked out. Found her in the kitchen. Standing still. Tea boiling. But she wasn't watching it. She was lost in thought. "Aisha," he said again, softer. This time she turned. Slowly. Like she had to remind herself where she was. "Yes," she asked. Daniel studied her face. Something had changed again. Not dramatically, but enough to feel irreversible. "We need to talk properly today," he said. Aisha nodded. "I know." That answer was too calm. Too final. They sat across from each other at the table. The same table where they once shared meals, small conversations, brief smiles. Now it felt like an interrogation table. Daniel spoke first. "I don't want this distance between us," he said. Aisha listened without interrupting. "I've been thinking," he continued. "Maybe I didn't realize how much you needed emotional presence." Aisha nodded slightly. "That's true," she said simply. Daniel paused. "And I also think you didn't always tell me directly what you needed." Aisha didn't react defensively. She just looked at him. Then said, "I did tell you." Silence. Daniel frowned slightly. "When?" he asked. Aisha leaned back. "In every small moment," she said. "In every silence. In every time I waited longer than I should have. In every dinner that turned cold. In every time I stopped repeating myself." Her voice stayed calm, but heavy. "You just didn't recognize those as communication." Daniel looked down for a moment. For the first time, he didn't respond immediately. Because part of him knew she wasn't exaggerating. She wasn't accusing. She was describing. That difference mattered. But it also hurt. "I didn't know it was that serious," Daniel finally said. Aisha nodded slowly. "That's the problem," she replied. Daniel looked up. "What is?" Aisha held his gaze. "You only realized it when it became serious." Silence fell again. But this time it was different. Not confusion. Not misunderstanding. Clarity. Daniel exhaled. "I don't want to lose you," he said. That sentence came out more honest than anything before. Aisha didn't react immediately. She just looked at him for a long time. Then said quietly, "I know." That simplicity hurt more than rejection. Because it wasn't emotional anymore. It was factual. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Then help me understand, he said, from the beginning. Aisha's eyes softened slightly, but there was sadness in them now. I tried, she said. I really did. She paused. I just stopped expecting you to understand without effort. That line stayed in the air longer than anything else, because effort was the missing word between them. Not love, not care, effort. A long silence followed. Then Daniel spoke again. What do you want now? Aisha looked down for a moment, then answered honestly. I want peace. Daniel nodded slowly. I can give you that. Aisha shook her head. No, she said softly, you can't give me peace anymore. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? She looked at him again. Peace doesn't come from absence of conflict, she said. It comes from emotional safety. A pause. And I don't feel emotionally safe anymore. That was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Daniel stood up slightly. So what are you saying? He asked. Aisha also stood. Now both of them were facing each other fully. Not sitting, not avoiding, fully present. I'm saying, she said carefully, I don't hate you. Daniel listened. I don't even think you're a bad person. Her voice trembled slightly now. But I also don't think I can keep living like this. Silence. Daniel's expression changed. Like what? He asked. Aisha took a breath. Like I'm alone inside a marriage. That sentence broke something in the room. Because it wasn't anger. It wasn't blame. It was truth. Daniel stepped closer slightly. Aisha, we can fix this, he said. Aisha shook her head slowly. No, she replied. Then softer. We could have fixed it earlier. That earlier carried everything. Missed chances. Ignored silences. Unspoken pain. Delayed understanding. Daniel's voice lowered. So what now? Aisha looked at him. Long pause. Then said, now we accept what this has become. Daniel frowned. And what has it become? Aisha's eyes softened. Two people who loved each other, she said quietly, but didn't learn how to keep understanding each other. Silence. Heavy. Final feeling. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt suspended. Like the world outside didn't exist. Only this moment. Only this truth. Daniel finally spoke again. I never stopped caring, he said. Aisha nodded. I know. And I never meant to hurt you. I know that too. Another pause. Then Daniel asked something quieter. Then why does it still feel like I lost you? Aisha's eyes lowered slightly. Because, she said softly, love without understanding slowly stops feeling like love. That line stayed between them. Unmoving. Unchanging. A long silence followed. Not tense now. Just final. Like both of them had reached the edge of everything they could emotionally carry. Aisha finally spoke again. I think we need space. Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't argue. Didn't fight. Didn't deny. Because for the first time, he understood this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about emotional survival. He stepped back slightly. Will you come back? He asked. Aisha looked at him. Long pause. Then answered honestly. I don't know. That uncertainty hurt more than any rejection. Because it wasn't a no. But it wasn't a yes either. It was unfinished. Like them. Daniel nodded slowly. Then turned away for a moment. When he looked back, Aisha was still there. But something in her posture had already begun shifting. Not leaving physically, but emotionally stepping away. Hours later, the apartment was quiet again. But this silence was different from before. It wasn't filled with misunderstanding anymore. It was filled with acceptance. Painful, heavy, but real. Aisha stood near the window one last time, looking outside. Not waiting, just reflecting. Daniel stood behind her for a moment, then quietly said, "I wish I understood sooner." Aisha didn't turn, but her voice came softly. "So do I." And that was it. No dramatic ending. No sudden reconciliation. No loud goodbye. Just two people standing in the aftermath of love that didn't fail, but slowly faded through silence, misunderstanding, and emotional distance. Final line. Some marriages don't end because of lack of love. They end because love was never translated into understanding.